Peter Dunne joining us now. And Peter, you know what it's all about, going into kind of coalition talks and negotiations. We're in a situation here where Jacinda Ardern doesn't have to, right? She's got a clear majority on the night. We heard from Helen Clark a little earlier. And she seems to be suggesting insurance policy is the wise thing to do. What are you picking?
I think there are two aspects to this. I think from Ardern's position, insurance policy is very much the wise thing to do if she can get an arrangement with the Greens. I do think, however, because she has a majority in her own right and doesn't need the Greens might want to think very carefully about whether being dragged too closely into the web. Because what will happen is if they are, they will get the blame for everything that goes wrong, not Labour. So while Labour may want and probably be prudent to seek the insurance policy, the Greens, I think, may want to think twice about whether they take up the invitation. So
what would you think would be the most attractive option, like some kind of memorandum of understanding rather than a full confidence?
Yeah, there's a range of options. A coalition, I think, is out the door.
Yeah.
Confidence and supply with ministerial positions outside the Cabinet is a possibility. The other possibility is that the Greens may choose to say, look, we won't bring the government down, so we could either abstain on confidence and supply, and we'll take every other issue as case by case. Yeah, that gives them a lot of freedom, and with the numbers the way they are, it doesn't imperil Labour's chances of being able to pass a budget. Having been in,
a couple of combinations of government, what's the goal? Do you want policy? Do you want a ministerial badge? What are the priorities, really?
It depends. I mean, primarily it's policy. You want to get the things that you're particularly passionate about able to be implemented, or at least put on the table to be considered to be implemented.
So it doesn't matter if you get a figurehead, say that loosely, if you're not seen to be the Minister of Revenue, for example, but you get a policy gain.
Yeah. Now, having said that, there are times when it's desirable to have the ministerial portfolio to make sure you drive the policy change the way you want it. In other words, you don't get, yes, we'll give you this, and our Minister of so-and-so will run it.
Yeah.
And then it gets sort of weakened in the process. But the issue of the ministerial portfolios it was an issue that arose in 2005 for the first time. And I remember in our case, it wasn't part of the negotiations. We didn't raise it. It was suddenly thrown on the table at the 11th hour by Helen Clark as an offer. As an offer, yes.
Yeah.
Because I think she thought she was struggling to get us over the line. The truth of it was that it took me by surprise. I took about 24 hours to get my head around the idea. And then she said to me one day, she said, that was the thing that really finally persuaded you, wasn't it? And so with a sort of a smirking smile, I said, well, no, actually, I think we were probably there anyway, but we're not going to say no. But now it's become more and more the norm than it was then.
Yeah.
I just think from the Greens' point of view, they just want to think very carefully about all of this.
But, you think about it, Sue Bradford, from James Shaw's perspective as the climate change minister and the work he was able to do with the carbon zero legislation, he will want to carry that on. If he has the opportunity to be climate change minister, wouldn't he take that?
Oh, I'm sure that he would be very tempted, but I just as Jacinda Ardern said tonight that she was taking her time to think through whether they might go into a relationship with anyone else. I just hope the Greens also take their time should any possibility of any relationship come, just for the reasons Peter Dunne's been talking about. I think Peter's dead right. It's very dangerous for the Greens to go into any form of... There's actually no need for Labour doesn't need the Greens at all. To me, politics and Parliament is about numbers. It's brutal as. It's down to the numbers. When you don't have the numbers, when you have no power, and in this situation the Greens would have zero power, but if they do anything, confidence and supply, ministers outside Cabinet, anything at all, they'll be compromised for the next 3 years. They'll be, just as they have been for the last 3 years, saying, sorry, we can't do this on the climate, we can't do that on poverty because we're part of an arrangement here. Whereas if they just stay clean and clear, they can put forward their strongest possible policy positions, question and critique Labour, which badly needs it, and much better for the future of the Green Party.
As somebody who is worked for progressive causes for most of your political career, when you heard Jacinda Ardern's speech and she's saying the lines, we're going to govern for everyone, sounding very conciliatory towards perhaps national voters who have voted Labour for the first time, does that give you confidence that this is going to be a transformative government?
None whatsoever. I wanted to hear her talking about what Labour would be doing for people who are homeless and substandard and inadequate housing. Their housing policies are just nowhere in terms of what needs to happen. What are they going to do about welfare? They've done virtually nothing for the last 3 years. Those are the people I wish Jacinda had been talking to tonight, but there was no sign of it. And really, the Greens do stand in a much stronger position on issues like housing, welfare and climate change. But if they become captured again, get sucked into a relationship with Labour, even worse now, because in the last 3 years, there was a reason that Labour needed them. This time they don't.
How long has Labour got on those issues before that weight of expectation, before those on the left, the further to the left than the centre, will just get frustrated and start taking it out on them, you know?
1 day. People like me have been frustrated by Labour for a very long time now because of their inaction.
But so that weight of expectation is going to be quite something, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, but I don't think, because of how Labour's been for the last 3 years, I don't think they give very little weight to the voices, to the votes of they'll speak to it. They'll talk about kindness and compassion, but even their own welfare expert advisory group paid $1.5 million for that.
I wonder if that's
and then 3 recommendations were picked up.
There's more in progress. 22 is apparently in progress, but that is one area where surely they could make fast movements now that they've got this.
Absolutely.
They could say, right, we're going to put maybe it's not to 47% of that was the recommended top end of the benefit increase, but you could see a nod to a bigger benefit increase, couldn't you?
You could. You could see a move to individualisation. They've accepted that the benefit's way too low.
But that would be one thing they could do without breaching the trust of those other votes. Because it's not a broken promise. It's not something it's radical. It was in that document.
Absolutely. They could pick up all the recommendations of the Welfare Expert Advisory Group totally legitimately. They don't have to bow to Winston Peters at all now.
So you're not sorry to see Winston Peters go, having
I'm
been there?
I have to be honest. It's a good thing for New Zealand politics. He's had his time. He and Shane Jones and others have really held this country back for the last 3 years.
But
there are also things that have happened with racing and fishing that are not good at all.
But as Corin raises there, obviously Labour was there by the grace of New Zealand first, and it was Jim Bolger who was basically calling Jacinda Ardern out, I think slightly, by saying, hey, she didn't mention Winston in her victory speech, in essence. But you say no tears shed for him.
Not from me, I'm afraid. His time is done.
Peter, what do you reckon? Because you've been in there, you've worked with him. What's his legacy, and what's the loss, if any?
I don't think there's a loss. I think the legacy is one of actually considerable ability, but consistent missed opportunity. I think he could have been a very good political leader, but there was always this sort of self-destruct mechanism within him that somehow never enabled him to get quite to the point. I mean, this is the first time he survived a full term in government and then gets booted out by the electorate. Every other time he's been booted out by the Prime Minister.
Himself every time.
Yeah, and I don't quite understand why, but I think he could have achieved a lot more and been someone who could have left a much more substantial legacy had that little gremlin not been within his system.
How did you find working with him?
Oh, challenging.
Are you being diplomatic, Peter?
No, he was someone you had to be conscious of, wanting to be the person who got the credit for the decision that was being made. So what you needed to do was work out how you could get what you wanted and let him think he'd given it to you.
OK, well, let's go for more analysis to Guyon.
Thanks, Lisa. If you're just tuning in at 10 to midnight...
Good on you.
Yeah, well done. And what's happened? Let's bring up a graphic for those who are watching on the television, see what it all looks like in terms of who won the seats in Parliament. There it goes there. If you're watching on TV, if you're listening on the radio, I'll read it out to you. So you're looking at 75 seats for the centre-left. That's 64 for Labour, 10 for Green. And we're adding in there one Māori Party seat. And I guess you'd have to do that. that. We're just speaking to Rawiri Waititi, who is bringing the Māori Party back into the House. But when you look at the blue and some of those yellow dots there, if you're watching it, 45 for the centre-right, just 35 MPs for National. How many did you have last time, Amy?
55. We started with 55 last election night, yeah.
Yeah, and tell me, the gender, you've been crunching the numbers. I mean, National lose a lot of women.
We do, and that worries me. You know, we've lost a lot of diversity just with the way the losses of seats have worked out. But the numbers I've just done quickly say that of our 35, only 9 women, so 25%. And, you know, as someone who's stood up for wanting to see more women in politics and in power generally across New Zealand, that's something National's going to have to think about.
Yeah, and on the diversity stuff too, the way it falls there, it doesn't look great. And, you know, I'm not going to bang on about this, but you've got to look like New Zealand, otherwise you can't be a mainstream party, right?
And it's very hard to rebuild, you know, because they need that credibility, and there's a very heightened concern about looking like New Zealand on ethnicity, gender, other issues.
Remember when there was a guy called Todd Muller, I don't know if you remember him, who had the leader, and then suddenly realised, thankfully, you can't have a mirror looking back here, which is just not representative
But
of the
National
community.
have been making some strides there, and if this election had been held in February or March, this would be very different. I mean, that would have been a very different graphic up on the screen, because National was ahead, and there would have been a lot more new women coming in from the list in electorate seats. So,
these things are a process of a lot of years. You know, you can have a shot at Todd, but actually you don't come in and suddenly magic up a caucus that's what you want it to be. It's a process of candidate selection and development and mentoring them through over many years and bringing them up as they advance through the party so they're ready to take on senior roles. But I think you're absolutely right. National does best when we represent New Zealand. We are a broad church. It's one of the things I love about National. And whether you're a conservative Christian or a liberal social campaigner or a farmer or an urban seat, we all come together over a set of views that we share. But when you start to look more and more ethnocentric, gender-centric and less representative, it's hard to resonate with New Zealand. And I think that will be part of their rebuilding challenge.
You mentioned February 2020. It's hard to go back that long with thinking about the fact that under Simon Bridges, you're at 46 or 48, right, some of those polls. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about the polls because we haven't talked about them all night. And actually, I reckon that the pollsters, it's not quite, I mean, it's sort of Jim Bolger's famous line with Bugger the pollsters in 93.
That's right. And they were out of line then.
Yeah, and they were out of line then. But and I've been pretty supportive of our polling because it's been pretty good. People always complain about polls, but largely they've been pretty accurate. But
and they were really accurate at the last election. But
they were, weren't they?
But it's so wrong.
So just for people, it was Colmar and News Hub had National at between 31 and 33.
That's right.
And they got 27.
Yeah.
So that's quite a difference.
It is. And actually there's who knows how much of it is that last minute breaking, because we did have a big undecided group. And we've always sort of said, you know, internally that when people look at you and think you don't have a reasonable path to winning, they can desert you. Yeah. So, you know, we don't know.
So when things go bad.
That's right.
That's right.
You know, and you do get this, well, they've got no hope, we're off.
So it's kind of like a reverse bandwagon effect.
That's
people
right.
see that you're
it's almost
lost.
self-fulfilling.
That's right. It's a self-perpetuating thing. People want to back winners. And so, and this whole campaign, Labor's look like winning it.
They've had a slick campaign, haven't they? Have they put a foot wrong? Put it this way.
Well, they didn't have any policy. I mean, their biggest policy was another national holiday. I mean, they ran a campaign of do nothing wrong, say nothing, and ride the COVID coattails, and it worked for them.
I didn't say it wasn't cynical. I said it was a good campaign.
I'm not saying it didn't work, but when your biggest policy is let's have a national holiday, come on.
I agree.
But,
I mean,
they read the mood of the country.
And throughout,
they did put
you got a sense of passion and enthusiasm out on the campaign trail. People really did thank Jacinda Ardern.
Because it was about Jacinda Ardern and it was about COVID.
Yeah. And I think that would have happened before COVID, in fact, that
she was their big weapon.
Yeah,
I mean, she was their biggest asset, right. And they knew that and they played it.
Doesn't explain the polls, though. I mean, sometimes you have the shy Tory effect, whereby people aren't willing to tell the pollsters that they're willing to vote for a Conservative or a right-wing.
There's still that in the UK, certainly in Australia too.
But I don't know why it's happened here.
It's almost like a shy Labourite or a shy Green voter.
Makes no sense.
Yeah, it underplayed that. I wonder too, the advance voting was so big. We had 2 million votes cast before the day. So the polls were it was almost like sort of exit polls as they went along.
And it didn't capture that, though.
No, it didn't really, did it?
Yeah, and so even on voter turnout, we're yet to see those final numbers. Right. It looks like voter turnout will be up for this year, but I'm still a bit uncertain about that. I mean, by and large, I think it would be quite interesting.
Doesn't it make a mockery, too, of this idea that we can't possibly look at a billboard or say anything, the media can't write anything on the day when you've had 2 weeks of 2 million people voting in the thick of a campaign? We probably have to look at that, don't we?
I think we can cope with voting when there's billboards and so forth around.
The only nice thing about it, though, and look, you're absolutely right on the logic.
And it means we don't have to work on it.
It means that it's done, right? It means that you get to election day and those signs are down and we get on with our lives. You go to some countries and the signs are still up 2 or 3 months later, or the local body, and no one's got round to taking them down. I tell you, as a candidate, you're always bloody pleased to have those things in the shed, done, finished, she's over.
I think New Zealanders might be quite pleased that this election is done and over now.
It was interminable.
Everyone's been exhausted by this, and I don't think there's going to be many people that are unhappy. Even with the result, they won't be surprised.
I don't know. I think I'm already picking up just talking to people that there's a lot of shell-shocked people out there because, as you say, the polls were telling us it wasn't going to be a great night for National, but no one was quite expecting the toweling that they ended up getting, and that's hard to take.
And let's look at some of those, the National seats that were lost. Wanganui was lost.
Wanganui, yeah.
Wairarapa, Upper Harbour.
Upper Harbour. I mean, New Plymouth and Ilam are the ones...
Ilam, I'm still getting my
Rangitata. And these are seats that are core blue. When I look at the seats around me that I know well, big chunk of the party vote's gone to ACT. And I think there's a combination of people... bit grumpy with us, or not convinced about us, hate Labour and Greens, maybe Winston last time, realised that he fed them a load of drivel and found another home. Now, it wasn't enough to change the electorate for ACT, but it was probably enough just to weaken... Look, I don't know. We're casting around. What I'm surprised about tonight is how much the party level swing played out to electorates. And Bryce made the point earlier, but we haven't seen that before. When Labour crashed to these sorts of levels, we didn't see it flow through to the electorate changes as much.
Even your own seat, which National held, didn't they? But the majority went from, you had 19,000.
20,000, yeah.
Who's counting at that level? Down to 4,000.
That's
so
right.
That's...
And Labour won the party vote and so on, which are words that I never thought I would say.
Wow.
And that to me just shows what a seismic shift.
Well, it's interesting because how much will that... And because when Jacinda Ardern was saying, I'm going to govern for all New Zealanders, she's going to have to govern for the dairy farmers of Rangitata. I'll leave you with that, Corin. I don't know if there's a segue there.
I don't know if there is either, but boy...
Unusual night, hasn't it been? And we've just been talking here in the studio with Peter Dunne about all these newbies who are going to be coming to Parliament. I mean, how's that going to work, corralling them all down there and showing them the ropes?
It'll be a bit of that, but a lot of them who've been elected, and some of them clearly have been elected against their expectation, will arrive shell-shocked, excited, and bulletproof in their sense, and they'll have an agenda. They may well wear a party label, but they're there to do their thing. And being disciplined into the caucus role, and suddenly realising actually whether you're in the ACT Party backbench or the Labour Party backbench, or even if there are any new National Party MPs, you are a small part of the team and you do as you're for Labour. And their big triumph, they've got all this new swathe of MPs who will want to put the world right by midday.
So you're talking about basically make sure nobody puts their foot in their mouth in the first couple of weeks. Yep. Yeah. So, Jane, I mean, what can we expect in the next few days?
So Jacinda Ardern, I expect will make a media appearance tomorrow, and that's when we might get a little bit more sense of what she's planning to do. She'll obviously take some time to talk to some senior people. National, of course, is going to be another one to watch. Now, under their rules, the caucus has to, quote, appoint a leader as soon as it is practically possible after a general election. So that could be Tuesday. Now, that's not to say, that basically forces a vote. So what they're going to do, and with a new caucus or new members, some new members, faced with that on your first day back, that's going to be quite incredible. But yeah, about 25 new MPs for Labour and about a dozen sitting MPs gone from National. So it's going to be a very different looking caucus, and ACT's going to be very interesting too. A number of complete newbies and how David Seymour is going to manage them. It's going to be...
How much of a steer are we going to get on the Greens and whether Labour would bring them in?
I don't think we'll get too much tomorrow. I think there really needs to be discussions, obviously, with not just MPs, but with the wider Labour Party. There will be probably some informalities going on, but it may be a few days yet.
So heaps to look forward to. Hey, it's been an interesting night, that's for sure. We just want to say very big thank you to all the panellists who joined us this evening. Bryce Edwards, outgoing National MP Amy Adams, former United Future leader Peter Dunne, former New Zealand First and National MP Tau Henare, Green MP Sue Bradford, and lawyer and justice advocate Julia Whaiputi, who also joined us, and of course Dave Cormack, former Party Policy Director for the Greens, and Guyon, who's been in the Situation Room all night.
And I'm back tomorrow.
Lucky you!
Susie Ferguson and I are back from 8 a.m. tomorrow. We have a morning report special from 8 to 10 to wrap up all the results. Thanks for my guests who've been coming in and out of the room all night. Amy Adams, Bryce Edwards with me here. And thank you all for listening and for watching on this historic night for election 2020.